My name is Clara Whitmore. I am 18 years old, and 20 minutes before my birthday party ended, my father publicly thanked me for doing the right thing for the family, even though I had never agreed to anything. The worst part? Everyone applauded. The sound filled the dining room so suddenly it made my chest tighten. Wine glasses lifted, chairs shifted across hardwood floors. My mother smiled at me with wet eyes like this was some emotional milestone we were all supposed to celebrate together. And my Uncle Martin, who had been pushing my father to sell my grandmother's lake house for almost a year, actually raised his glass toward me like I'd finally become useful. I sat there holding a dinner napkin in my lap so tightly my fingertips went numb. Outside, rain slid down the windows of our house in Brookhaven Heights. Expensive neighborhood, clean sidewalks, white fences. The kind of place where families cared more about appearances than honesty. Inside, the dining room smelled like rosemary chicken, candle wax, and my mother's vanilla perfume. Everything looked warm. Nothing felt safe. My father stood near the head of the table, wearing the same navy button-down shirt he used to wear to client meetings back when his accounting firm was still successful. He looked confident again for the first time in months. That should have been my first warning, because desperate men don't smile like that unless they think they already won. "To family," he said, raising his glass higher. "And to new beginnings." Everyone repeated it. "To family." I didn't. My little sister Sophie noticed immediately. She sat 3 seats away from me, fork frozen halfway to her mouth. 15 years old, smart enough to hear tension before adults admitted it existed. My mother noticed too. Her smile tightened slightly. Tiny movement. Most people wouldn't catch it. I always did. Growing up in our house trained me to study people the way storm chasers study clouds. You learned things early in the Whitmore house. You learned how long silence lasted before an argument. You learned what mood your father was in from the way he dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. You learned when your mother was lying because she became overly calm. And you learned that money conversations happened quietly until they became dangerous. My father looked directly at me. "Clara understands this is the best decision for everybody." There it was again. Decision. Not discussion, not possibility, decision. Like something had already been signed somewhere. My Uncle Martin leaned back in his chair beside the fireplace, swirling whiskey around his glass. "It's a fantastic offer," he added casually. "Honestly, the timing couldn't be better." I looked at him, then at the leather folder sitting beside his chair. Dark brown, embossed logo, Hawthorne Ridge Development. The moment I saw it, something cold moved through my stomach, because I recognized that logo. 2 months earlier, after my grandmother Eleanor's funeral, I'd fallen asleep in the back seat of Martin's SUV during the drive home from Cedar Lake. I woke up briefly at a gas station and saw that same folder open beside him. Blueprints, parcel maps, numbers highlighted in yellow. At the time, I convinced myself I misunderstood. Now I knew I hadn't. My father kept talking. "The maintenance alone has become unrealistic. Taxes, repairs, insurance." "Dad." The word slipped out before I could stop it. The room went quiet immediately. Even the rain outside suddenly sounded louder. My father looked at me carefully. "Yes?" I swallowed once. When exactly was I part of this conversation? Nobody moved. My mother set her wineglass down very slowly. "Clara," she said softly, warning hidden beneath sweetness, "don't do this tonight." That phrase, God. My family loved that phrase. Not tonight, not here, not now. Translation, Don't embarrass us publicly. My uncle leaned forward slightly. Nobody's trying to hurt you, kiddo. Kiddo. I hated when he called me that, especially because Martin only used soft voices when he wanted something. We all loved your grandmother, he continued. But the reality is that property like that changes lives financially. Property, not Lake Hollow, not Grandma's house. Property, like the place where my grandfather taught me to fish and my grandmother taught me how to patch screen doors, was suddenly just square footage near water. Mrs. Donnelly from next door tried to help. Poor woman. She smiled nervously and said, Eleanor always said Clara loved that cabin most. She did, I said quietly. My father exhaled through his nose, impatient now. There it was, the real version of him slipping through. Sweetheart, he said, you're 18 now. You need to start thinking practically. Practically. Another family word. In our house, practical usually meant emotionally convenient for someone else. I looked around the table. 23 people, neighbors, church friends, 2 of my father's former business clients, people eating garlic mashed potatoes while my family casually discussed dismantling the last thing my grandparents ever protected. Then my father smiled again. And this part still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. He reached into Martin's folder, pulled out a document, and placed it gently on the table beside my birthday cake. The paper had coloured tabs on the side, professional tabs, prepared tabs, not hypothetical tabs, signed tabs. My pulse started pounding immediately. What is that? I asked. My uncle answered instead of my father. Preliminary sale agreement. I stared at him. Sale agreement. The room tilted slightly, not physically, emotionally, like suddenly all the air changed density. You already signed paperwork? I asked. Nobody answered fast enough. That was answer enough. Sophie looked between all of us nervously. My mother finally stepped in. It's preliminary, she said quickly. Nothing final. Then why is it signed? Silence. My father's jaw flexed once, the same way it used to before he lost his temper when I was younger. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny, because suddenly everything made sense. The private phone calls, the late-night arguments downstairs, Martin showing up every Sunday, my father suddenly pretending my grandmother's house was a burden instead of a family landmark. They weren't considering selling it. They had already planned the entire thing. And they thought public pressure would force me to cooperate. My uncle gave me a patient smile. Clara, nobody's stealing anything from you. The fact that he chose the word stealing without me saying it first told me everything. I leaned back slowly in my chair, and for the first time all night, I stopped feeling emotional. That scared me more than the anger, because calm meant clarity, and clarity meant I was finally seeing my family without excuses protecting them. You already promised them the property, didn't you? I asked quietly. Martin's expression changed first. Tiny crack, tiny panic, then gone. My father stepped in immediately. That's enough. No denial. I noticed that too. Mrs. Donnelly suddenly stood up awkwardly. I think Harold needs help bringing dessert from the kitchen. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted cake anymore. The room felt contaminated now. My mother tried one last time to control the situation. Clara, honey, everybody here loves you. I looked directly at her. Then why do I feel cornered? That landed harder than I expected, because my mother actually looked hurt for a second, real hurt, not manipulative hurt, which almost made me feel guilty. Almost. Then my uncle ruined it. Look, Martin sighed. The buyers are expecting an answer next week. There it was, the truth. Not someday, next week. This had already gone too far. My father rubbed his forehead. Can we please not turn this into a scene? Scene, another important family word. Because in our house, the real problem was never betrayal. It was visibility. I looked at the birthday candles flickering beside the paperwork, 18 tiny flames shaking in the air conditioning. And suddenly I remembered something my grandmother told me the summer I turned 13. We were sitting on the porch at Lake Hollow during a thunderstorm while she folded laundry from the clothesline. She looked out at the lake and said, "When money gets tight, Clara, people stop revealing who they are. They start revealing what they are." At 13, I didn't understand that sentence. At 18, sitting beside my own unsigned birthday cake while my family quietly tried to pressure me into surrendering my grandmother's home, I understood perfectly. My father picked up the sale agreement and slid it back into the folder. "We'll discuss this privately later." Not, "We won't sell it." Not, "You have a choice." Not, "I'm sorry." "We'll discuss this privately," meaning the pressure would continue once witnesses left. I stood up slowly. Every eye followed me. My chair scraped softly against the hardwood floor, and even now, months later, I still remember the exact feeling in my chest when I asked the next question, because part of me already knew the answer. "Dad," I said carefully, "how much debt are you actually in?" The entire room froze. Not emotionally, literally froze. My father stopped breathing for half a second. My mother's eyes widened instantly, and Uncle Martin looked at my father with the expression of a man watching a ceiling crack open above him. That was the moment I knew. This was never about taxes, never about maintenance, never about practicality. My father was drowning. And somewhere behind that leather folder, Lake Hollow had already been chosen as the sacrifice. At 11:38 that night, I stood barefoot in the rain outside Lake Hollow, staring at my Uncle Martin's truck parked beside my grandmother's cabin. Its headlights were off, driver's side empty, but light spilled faintly through the cabin windows, warm yellow against black water. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That happens sometimes when fear becomes confirmation. You stop wondering whether something is wrong and start calculating how bad it is. Rain tapped against the hood of my Honda while I sat gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt my fingers. The lake stretched behind the trees like dark glass. Fog hovered low over the water. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally. Like the second greed enters a place, it shrinks. I checked my phone. 11:39 p.m. 3 unread texts from my mother. "Where did you go? We need to finish this conversation. Your father is upset." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Please come home safe." Just pressure wrapped in concern. I silenced the phone and stepped out into the rain. The gravel crunched softly beneath my shoes as I walked toward the porch. Second step creaked. Still the same. Grandpa Walter used to joke that he'd fix it next summer. He never did. Part of me was suddenly grateful for that, because hearing that familiar creak reminded me this place still belonged to real people once, not investors, not developers, not desperate men in debt. I reached the front window carefully and looked inside. My Uncle Martin stood in the living room beside Grandma Eleanor's bookshelf, and he wasn't alone. 2 men in dark jackets stood near the fireplace, holding rolled-up blueprints. One wore work boots covered in wet mud, the other carried a laser measuring device. My stomach tightened instantly. Developers. Martin pointed toward the kitchen wall. "That load-bearing section can come down completely," he said. "Can come down. Not maybe, not eventually. Already planned." One of the men nodded. "Lake-facing glass here would sell fast." Sell. Everything with them came back to selling. I stared through the rain-streaked window at the room where my grandmother taught me card games during thunderstorms, where Grandpa fell asleep every Sunday in the same plaid chair beside the fireplace, where Christmas lights once reflected off the lake, while my mother still laughed naturally and my father still looked relaxed. And these men were discussing demolition angles. Martin walked toward the hallway. I ducked immediately beneath the window, heart pounding now, not from fear of being caught, from hearing strangers redesign memories while standing inside them. The front door opened. Warm light spilled across the porch. I stayed crouched beside the hydrangea bushes while Martin stepped outside with one of the developers. Rain hit the porch roof softly overhead. "You sure the granddaughter won't be a problem?" the man asked quietly. Martin laughed. Actually laughed. "She's 18 tomorrow. Emotionally attached, but harmless." Harmless. That word sat in my chest like a blade. The developer lit a cigarette under the porch awning. "What about ownership?" Martin lowered his voice. "Robert handles the family side. I handle paperwork." Paperwork. Not legal paperwork, strategic paperwork. There's a difference. The developer exhaled smoke toward the lake. "And the trust?" Everything inside me stopped. "Trust?" Martin answered immediately. "There is no trust." Too fast. Way too fast. Not confusion, prepared denial. The developer looked uncertain. "Because our attorney flagged something from an old tax transfer." "It's clean," Martin interrupted sharply. "The property passed through family after Eleanor died. End of story." Passed through family. That wasn't legal language. That was improvisation. The man studied him carefully for a second, then nodded slowly. "I just don't want surprises after due diligence starts." "There won't be surprises," Martin said, but his voice had changed slightly. Tighter now. I knew that tone. It meant uncertainty. And suddenly something clicked into place inside my head. Martin was bluffing. Maybe not completely, but enough. Enough that he needed the sale to happen before anyone looked too closely. The men went back inside. I stayed frozen in the rain for another full minute. Then I quietly moved toward the side window near Grandpa's office. The curtains there never fully closed right, another thing he meant to fix someday. Inside, Martin opened a folder across the desk. Even from outside, I recognized the Hawthorne Ridge logo again. The developer flipped through documents, then stopped. "Hold on." Martin looked up. "This signature line," the developer said. "Why isn't the daughter listed?" Martin's face changed instantly. Not panic, calculation. "Clara lives with Robert," he said smoothly. "Everything stays internal until final transfer." The developer frowned. "But if Eleanor's estate included descendants—" "It doesn't matter," Martin snapped. Too fast again, too emotional. Bad liars always become impatient when details appear. The room went quiet. Then the second developer spoke for the first time. Older guy, grey beard. "Maybe we should pause until title review clears." Martin leaned forward immediately. "No, absolutely not." There it was. Desperation. Real desperation. The kind that leaks through expensive watches and fake confidence. He lowered his voice. "Listen, Robert's already under pressure with First National." My heartbeat stopped. First National Bank. That was our bank. The same bank that financed Dad's accounting firm office 5 years ago. The older developer crossed his arms. "How bad?" Martin rubbed his face, then said the sentence that changed everything. "If this deal stalls, he loses the house." Silence, rain, thunder somewhere over the lake, and suddenly every strange thing from the last 6 months rearranged itself perfectly in my head. The late-night arguments, the fake optimism, Dad selling his Rolex, Mum pretending grocery budgets were healthy lifestyle changes. The stress, the pressure, the forced smiles. They weren't trying to sell Lake Hollow because they wanted money. They were trying to survive. And they were willing to sacrifice me to do it. The realization hurt far more than the betrayal itself. Because for 1 weak second, I understood them. That's the dangerous thing about family. Pain becomes easier to justify when you can see the fear underneath it. Inside the office, the younger developer shook his head. This is getting messy. It's not messy, Martin said sharply. It's emotional. There's a difference. No, messy was exactly the word. Because emotional people cry. Messy people forge things, hide things, pressure people publicly at birthday dinners. The older developer stood first. We're done for tonight. Martin looked furious now. You're overreacting. No, the man replied calmly. You're moving too fast. The meeting ended awkwardly after that. Chairs scraping, folders closing, forced handshakes. I moved away from the window before they exited. By the time the developers drove off, I was back beside my car hidden behind trees near the road. Martin remained inside the cabin alone. Lights still on. I checked the time. 12:14 a.m. Technically my birthday now. Happy 18. I watched my uncle move through the rooms slowly. Kitchen, hallway, living room. Like a man already imagining ownership. Then he stopped beside Grandma Eleanor's old reading chair near the fireplace. And something strange happened. He sat down. Just sat there quietly. No phone, no paperwork, nothing. Rain moved softly across the roof while he stared at the dark lake through the windows. For a second he looked exhausted. Not evil, not triumphant, just tired. And older than I remembered. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded paper, and stared at it for a very long time. I moved closer without thinking. The paper shook slightly in his hand, not from cold, stress. Then he whispered something I almost didn't hear. Dad, why would you do this? I froze. My grandfather. He was talking about my grandfather. Martin rubbed both hands over his face hard enough to bend his wedding ring sideways. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. He wasn't fully confident about ownership either, meaning somewhere, somehow. My grandfather had done something before he died, something Martin still didn't completely understand. My phone buzzed suddenly in my pocket. The sound was tiny. But inside complete silence, it felt explosive. Martin's head snapped toward the window instantly. My stomach dropped. He stood up immediately. I backed away from the cabin fast. Too late. The porch light flipped on. The front door opened hard. Who's there? I ran. Not dramatically, not movie running, real running, slipping slightly on wet gravel while trying not to fall. Behind me, I heard Martin step off the porch. Clara? I reached my car just as another flash of lightning cracked across the lake. Martin saw me immediately. For 1 second, neither of us spoke. Rain poured between us. His expression changed rapidly. Shock, anger, then something worse, fear. What are you doing here? He asked. I opened my car door slowly but didn't get inside. I could ask you the same thing. Martin glanced back toward the cabin, calculating again. Always calculating. You shouldn't be driving around alone this late. You shouldn't be showing developers Grandma's house without telling me. That landed. Hard. His jaw tightened immediately. It's complicated. No, I said quietly. I think it's actually becoming very simple. Lightning flashed again behind the trees. Martin stepped closer. Listen to me carefully, Clara. Your father is in serious trouble. There it was again. N. Ot. We made a mistake. Not, we're sorry. Trouble, financial gravity pulling morality apart piece by piece. He should have told me himself. He was trying to protect you. I almost laughed in his face. By ambushing me in front of 20 people with sales contracts? Martin exhaled heavily, rain soaked through his jacket collar. He's drowning. So you decided to drown me too? That hit him. I saw it. Tiny pause, tiny guilt, then gone. You're young, he said carefully. You don't understand how fast debt destroys people. And you don't understand what Grandma told me before she died. His expression changed immediately. Sharp now, dangerously sharp. What did she tell you? Wrong question. Not, what did she mean? Not, what did she say about me? Specific interest. My pulse slowed again. She told me to protect Lake Hollow. Martin stared at me silently through the rain. Then something happened I'll never forget. For the first time in my entire life, my uncle looked genuinely nervous. My Uncle Martin stopped looking at me like a teenager after that. You can actually see the exact second adults realize you might become dangerous to them. Their posture changes, their tone changes, the performance drops. Standing there in the rain outside Lake Hollow at 12:26 in the morning, Martin stopped speaking to me like kiddo. Now he was studying me, carefully, like he was trying to figure out how much I knew. Water rolled down the shoulders of his dark coat while thunder moved low across the lake behind him. The porch light cast a pale yellow reflection over the wet gravel between us. What exactly did Eleanor tell you? He asked again. Not Grandma, not Mom, Eleanor. That told me something too. People stop using affectionate names when emotion becomes inconvenient. I crossed my arms against the cold. She told me some people only see land after the people disappear from it. Martin's eyes narrowed slightly. The rain filled the silence for him. You always were her favorite, he said finally. There was bitterness buried under the sentence. Old bitterness, years old, maybe decades. I suddenly remembered something strange from when I was 13. Grandpa Walter fixing the dock while Martin argued with him near the garage. I couldn't hear the full conversation back then, only one sentence. You gave Clara the key before your own sons. At the time I thought he meant a spare cabin key. Now I wasn't so sure. Martin looked toward the lake. You know what your grandfather's problem was? I almost answered immediately, but instinct told me to stay quiet. People reveal more when silence makes them uncomfortable. He believed loyalty mattered more than survival, Martin continued. Easy philosophy when you're not staring at foreclosure notices. Foreclosure. There it was again. My father's financial disaster wasn't theoretical anymore. It had a shape now, a timeline, pressure, consequences. How bad is it? I asked. Martin rubbed rainwater from his forehead. Your father owes more than he can cover. How much? No answer. That meant enough to scare them. The lake wind moved sharply through the trees behind us. Somewhere farther down the shoreline, a buoy bell clanged softly against metal. Martin shoved both hands into his coat pockets. Hawthorne Ridge offered enough to erase everything. Everything. Mortgage, business debt, maybe more. Suddenly I understood why my father looked relieved at dinner instead of guilty. He thought salvation was already arriving, and I was the obstacle standing in front of it. Martin took another step toward me. You have to understand something, Clara. Men panic when they think they're about to lose everything. I stared at him. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, he admitted quietly. It's supposed to make you realistic. Realistic. Another adult word people use when they want morality discounted. I looked past him toward the cabin windows, glowing softly through the rain. My grandmother's curtains still hung beside the kitchen sink, crooked slightly on the right side because Grandpa never measured anything properly. I suddenly remembered helping Grandma Eleanor paint those walls pale green when I was 11. My father never came that weekend, said he was busy. But Martin came for 4 hours and spent almost all 4 talking privately with Grandpa outside near the dock. Even then, Lake Hollow had been a negotiation to them, not a home. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. Mom, 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail. I ignored it. Martin noticed. She's worried. No, I said quietly. She's managing. That landed harder than I expected because Martin looked away immediately. People hate hearing ugly truths phrased calmly. You think we're villains, he muttered. I almost said yes, but the truth was more complicated now. Villains are simpler, cleaner, easier to hate. My father wasn't evil, he was drowning. And drowning people grab whatever floats nearest, even family. Martin checked his watch. We should get back. We? Your parents know you're here by now. I looked at him carefully. Did you know about the debt before everyone else? Tiny pause, tiny hesitation. Yes. How long? About a year. A year, meaning while Grandma Eleanor was dying in hospice, while she was struggling to breathe, while she asked me to keep Lake Hollow safe, my father and uncle were already trying to figure out how to liquidate it. Something cold settled permanently inside my chest then. Not rage, not sadness. Distance. The kind that never fully goes away once it arrives. Martin noticed my expression immediately. It wasn't like that. How would you know what it was like for me? That shut him up. For a moment we just stood there listening to rain hit the lake. Then he said something that changed the entire direction of my thoughts. Your grandfather made this harder than it needed to be. I looked at him sharply. What does that mean? Instant regret crossed his face, tiny but real. Nothing. No, what did you mean? Martin looked toward the cabin again, thinking, calculating, then deciding something. Finally, he sighed. 3 years before your grandfather died, he moved things around legally. My heartbeat slowed, not faster, slower, like my body suddenly entered survival mode. What things? Property structures, ownership protections, old man paranoia. You mean trusts? His silence answered before his mouth did. There it was, the word, trust. The same word I overheard from the developer earlier. Grandma Eleanor wasn't just emotionally protective of Lake Hollow. Grandpa Walter had legally done something too. Martin saw realization hit my face and immediately stepped in. It doesn't matter anymore. That was another lie. People only say something doesn't matter when they're terrified it does. What kind of trust? I asked carefully. It was never finalized. Too fast, again. Then how do you know about it? No answer. Rainwater dripped from the porch roof behind him in steady rhythm. My brain moved quickly now. Grandpa changed legal structures, Martin knew. Developers mentioned title concerns. Dad thought the property was still sellable, meaning either the trust failed or my family didn't fully understand what Grandpa actually did. Martin suddenly stepped closer again. Listen carefully to me, Clara. His voice dropped lower, serious now. No lawyers. That surprised me. Why? Because once attorneys get involved, families stop recovering. Wrong. Attorneys get involved after families already break. They just expose where the damage started. You sound nervous, I said quietly. His eyes hardened instantly. I'm trying to protect your father. No, I replied. You're trying to close a deal. That one hit perfectly. Martin's face changed immediately. Rain slid down his forehead, while anger finally replaced charm completely. You think life is simple because you're 18, he snapped. You think promises matter more than reality. My grandmother's dying wish mattered. And your father losing his home doesn't? There it was, the emotional trap, the impossible choice, family survival versus family loyalty. And suddenly I understood the real strategy behind the birthday dinner. Not pressure, not celebration, consensus. If enough people publicly acted like the sale was already morally correct, then refusing would make me look selfish. God, it was actually brilliant. Cruel, but brilliant. I looked at Martin differently after realizing that. Not sloppy greed, coordinated manipulation. He saw the realization happen too, and for the first time all night, he looked worried about me specifically. Not emotional Clara, thinking Clara. That version scared him. A pair of headlights suddenly turned onto Hollow Shore Road behind us. Both of us turned instantly. My stomach dropped. Dad's Lexus. The black sedan rolled slowly into the gravel driveway before stopping hard beside Martin's truck. My father stepped out immediately without an umbrella. He looked exhausted. Not angry first, scared first. That surprised me. Jesus Christ, he muttered, running a hand through wet hair. Clara, what are you doing? Interesting, not, why are you here? What are you doing? Like my presence itself disrupted a plan already in motion. Mum climbed out next from the passenger side, wearing a cream-coloured coat over pyjamas. Her mascara had smeared slightly beneath one eye. She'd been crying. Or trying to, hard to tell sometimes. The four of us stood in the rain facing each other outside the cabin. Family portrait from hell. Dad looked between me and Martin. You talked to her? Martin answered carefully. She overheard the developers. Silence. Dad closed his eyes briefly, and in that moment, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Not because of age. Defeat. Real defeat. Mum stepped toward me first. Oh, honey. There it was, the soft, emotional approach. Always Mom's role. She reached for my arm. I stepped back instinctively. That hurt her. Actually hurt her. I saw it immediately, but I couldn't stop anymore. Not after tonight. Not after realizing everyone around me knew more than I did about my own grandmother's house. Dad looked toward the cabin, then back at me. We should go inside. No. The answer came immediately, sharp, certain. Dad blinked once. Clara. No more conversations where everyone knows something except me. Rain poured harder now. Wind pushed tree branches violently near the shoreline. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. Then Dad finally said the sentence I'd been waiting for all night. There's a possibility your grandfather created a trust. Possibility, still hiding behind uncertainty. What kind of trust? We don't know yet. Martin looked away instantly. Lie. Dad continued quickly. The paperwork was never fully located after he died. Located, not created. Located, meaning it existed. My pulse pounded again. Who looked for it? Nobody answered immediately. Then Mum spoke quietly. Martin did. Of course he did. I looked directly at my uncle. And? His jaw flexed once. There were references, notes, nothing complete. What kind of references? Again, silence. That was becoming the loudest thing in my family. Finally, Dad said, "Your grandfather may have transferred Lake Hollow before he died." Everything inside me went still. The rain, the wind, the lake, all of it faded behind one realization. If Grandpa transferred ownership before he died, then maybe nobody at that birthday table actually owned the house they were trying to sell. And judging by the look on Martin's face, he had known that possibility the entire time. At 7:16 the next morning, I woke up on the couch at Lake Hollow to the sound of someone knocking on the front door. Not aggressive knocking, measured knocking. 3 slow hits, pause, 2 more. Morning light filtered through the pine trees outside in pale silver lines. My neck hurt from sleeping against the armrest. Sometime after the argument in the rain, my parents had finally left around 2 a.m., and I stayed behind alone at the cabin because going home felt impossible. The fire in the stone fireplace had burned down to ash. Grandpa Walter's old wool blanket still covered me from the night before. For one disorienting second, waking up there felt comforting. Then I remembered everything. The sale, the debt, the trust, Martin hiding things, Dad lying. My 18th birthday collapsing in real time. The knocking came again. I stood slowly and checked my phone. No messages from Dad, 3 from Mum. "Please come home. Your father didn't sleep. We need to talk, calmly." Calmly. Funny word after psychological warfare disguised as birthday cake. I ignored the texts and walked to the door. Standing outside on the porch was a woman in a charcoal grey coat, holding a leather folder against her chest. Mid-50s, silver hair tied back neatly, sharp eyes, controlled posture. Attorney posture. "Clara Whitmore?" she asked. Something inside me tightened immediately. "Yes." "My name is Evelyn Mercer." She held out a business card. "Mercer and Hale Estate Law." Then she said the sentence that changed my life. "Your grandfather asked me to contact you the moment you turned 18. The air left my lungs, not metaphorically, literally. I stepped aside immediately. "Please come in." Evelyn entered slowly, looking around the cabin with the kind of familiarity that told me she'd been there before. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. Grandpa had planned beyond his death. The cabin smelled like cold coffee and rain-soaked wood. Morning fog still hovered beyond the windows facing the lake. Evelyn removed her gloves carefully before sitting at the kitchen table Grandpa built 32 years earlier. The same table my father was ready to sell to strangers with the house attached. Evelyn placed the leather folder down gently. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances," she said. The wording caught my attention immediately. Not, "I'm sorry for your loss." Not, "I'm sorry about your family." Circumstances, meaning she already knew exactly what was happening. "You talked to my grandfather before he died." "For years." "How many years?" She opened the folder calmly. 6. 6 years, meaning Grandpa started planning legal protection long before cancer, long before hospice, long before anyone else realized something was wrong. My heartbeat started climbing again. Evelyn slid a single document across the table toward me. At the top, Whitmore Family Irrevocable Trust. And beneath it, Grantors, Walter Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore, successor beneficiary, Clara Elise Whitmore. I stared at my own name. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too real. This is real? Yes. When was it created? August 14th, 6 years ago. 6 years. I tried doing the math automatically. I was 12. The same summer, Grandpa started teaching me everything about maintaining the cabin. Roof leaks, water lines, property markers, generator switches. At the time, it felt like bonding. Now I realized he was preparing me. Evelyn folded her hands neatly. Your grandfather believed Lake Hollow needed to stay with the person who loved it, rather than the person who needed to monetize it. Monetize. Even she knew exactly what kind of conflict this was. I looked back down at the trust papers. How much did my family know? Your grandfather informed your father and uncle that legal structures existed. Legal structures? Interesting phrasing. But he didn't tell them the details? No. Why? Evelyn's expression changed slightly, something between professionalism and pity, because he believed they would attempt to challenge them before you became legally protected. My chest tightened slowly. Grandpa knew. Years ago. He saw this coming, every bit of it. The room became emotionally overwhelming very quickly after that. Not dramatic overwhelming, quiet overwhelming. The kind where your body goes still because emotions become too large to process simultaneously. Grandpa knew. Grandma knew. And somehow that hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. Because it meant the people who loved me most spent years preparing for the possibility that my own parents would someday turn against me financially. Evelyn opened another section of the folder. There's more? Of course there was. There's always more when wealthy families start hiding documents. The cabin was transferred into trust ownership 5 years ago, she continued, which means legally speaking, neither your father nor your uncle has authority to sell the property. I looked up instantly. What? The title was removed from your grandparents' personal estate years before their deaths. I stared at her, then at the rain moving softly across the windows, then back at the paperwork. So Martin was lying last night? Yes. Did he know he was lying? Pause. Your uncle suspected the transfer existed, Evelyn said carefully, but without locating complete documentation, he appears to have assumed the trust was either inactive or incomplete. Assumed. That matched what I saw last night. Martin wasn't confident. He was gambling. With my grandmother's house. With my future, with my father's desperation. A wave of anger hit me so suddenly I had to stand up. I walked toward the sink and gripped the counter hard. Outside, a loon called somewhere across the lake. Long, lonely sound over dark water. He already signed sale paperwork, I said quietly. Evelyn nodded once. I know. I turned around sharply. You know? Hawthorne Ridge contacted our office yesterday afternoon. Everything stopped again. What? They requested preliminary title verification before final acquisition procedures. Of course they did. Real developers check ownership before closing, which meant they know the trust exists? Now they do. The room tilted emotionally. Not because of panic, because suddenly timelines mattered. Martin didn't just risk a sale, he risked fraud. Evelyn watched me carefully. Your uncle moved too aggressively. That was the most lawyer sentence I'd ever heard. What happens now? That depends on your father. Meaning? If your father cooperates, this remains a family legal dispute. And if he doesn't? Evelyn held my gaze evenly. Then your uncle becomes a much larger problem. A cold feeling spread through my stomach, because for the first time, I realized this situation might actually destroy people, not emotionally. Legally, my phone buzzed violently across the kitchen table, Dad calling. Evelyn glanced toward it. You should answer. I stared at the screen for 2 full seconds before picking up. Hello? Dad sounded exhausted immediately. Where are you? At the cabin. Long silence, then, is someone there with you? Interesting question. Not, are you safe? Not, can we talk? Who's there? I looked at Evelyn. She calmly sipped coffee from Grandma's ceramic mug like she'd already anticipated this exact moment. Yes. Another silence. Then Dad asked quietly, is it Mercer? The fact he knew her name told me everything. Evelyn slowly lowered the mug. Dad exhaled hard into the phone. Jesus Christ. Not surprise, recognition, defeat. You knew about her, I said. I knew your father talked to attorneys years ago. You told me there was no finalized trust. I hoped there wasn't. That honesty hit harder than another lie would have. I closed my eyes briefly. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees around Lake Hollow. Then Dad said something that genuinely hurt me. Clara, if this goes public, Martin's finished. Not, our family is broken. Not, I'm sorry. Martin's finished. Still protecting him, even now. I opened my eyes again slowly. And what about me? Silence, terrible silence, because he didn't have an answer. Evelyn stood quietly and walked toward the far side of the kitchen, giving me privacy without actually leaving. Professional, experienced, probably watched families implode like this before. Dad's voice dropped lower. You don't understand how bad things became after the firm collapsed. There it is again. What? You keep talking about money like it excuses everything. It explains everything. No, I said quietly, it explains you. That landed hard. I heard him stop breathing for a second. Then a different voice suddenly appeared faintly in the background. Martin. Even through the phone, I recognized his sharper tone immediately. Ask her if Mercer filed anything yet. Filed? Legal filing? My pulse spiked instantly. Dad covered the phone briefly, but not fully. Too late. I heard enough. And Evelyn noticed my expression change immediately. She already understood. Dad came back on the line. Clara, listen carefully to me. Has Evelyn recorded anything with the county yet? There it was. Panic. Real panic. Not emotional, procedural, meaning they were racing against paperwork now. I looked directly at Evelyn. She gave almost no reaction at all, except for one tiny movement, a tiny nod. Yes, something had already been filed. And suddenly I realized why Grandpa waited until I turned 18. Not because of emotion. Control, legal adulthood, protection, timing. Dad's voice cracked slightly now. Clara? I spoke very carefully. What exactly are you afraid she filed? What exactly are you afraid she filed? The silence on the other end of the phone lasted long enough for me to hear my father breathing. Not angry breathing, cornered breathing. Behind him, faint but sharp, I could still hear Uncle Martin moving around somewhere nearby. A door shut, papers shuffled. Somebody muttered something I couldn't make out. Then Dad finally spoke. Put Evelyn on the phone. No answer to my question, which was answer enough. I looked across the kitchen. Morning light stretched across Grandpa Walter's table in long, pale lines. Evelyn Mercer stood near the sink, calmly reorganizing documents inside her leather folder, like this was just another Tuesday. Maybe for her it was. Families breaking apart over money probably looked repetitive after enough years in estate law. I handed her the phone silently. She took it without expression. Yes, Robert. The fact she used his first name told me they had history. I sat down slowly while she listened. Outside, the lake moved softly beneath morning fog. The dock creaked against the water exactly the way it always had. Normal sounds. That's what felt strangest about the whole thing. The world never pauses because your family is collapsing. Evelyn finally spoke again. No, the Liz pendants was recorded at 7:02 this morning. My stomach dropped instantly. Dad started talking loudly enough that even I could hear fragments through the phone. Without warning. Completely unnecessary. You blindsided us. Evelyn's face never changed. No, Robert, she said evenly. Walter Whitmore blindsided you 6 years ago. I merely honored his instructions. She ended the call. Just ended it. No goodbye, nothing. Then she placed the phone carefully back on the table beside me. What's a lis pendens? I asked quietly. A public legal notice, she replied. It alerts the county that ownership rights over the property are under active legal protection. Meaning? Meaning your uncle cannot legally transfer, sell, leverage, or alter ownership of Lake Hollow without triggering immediate legal review. The room went very still. Martin lost, not emotionally, legally. And judging by the way my father reacted, they had just realized it. Evelyn sat across from me again. Your grandfather was extremely thorough. I looked down at the trust documents spread across the table, signatures, dates, official seals, years of preparation hidden beneath ordinary family life. And suddenly I remembered something tiny, something meaningless at the time. 3 summers ago, Grandpa Walter asked me to help him reorganize filing cabinets in the basement office. Not Dad, not Martin, me. He spent 4 hours labeling folders while casually teaching me the difference between ownership and access. At 16, I thought he was rambling. Now I realized he was making sure at least one person in the family understood what protection actually looked like. My phone buzzed again. This time, Martin. I stared at the screen. Evelyn noticed. You don't have to answer. But I did, because part of me needed to hear what desperation sounded like once manipulation stopped working. I picked up slowly. Hello? Martin skipped greetings completely. You had this planned? No panic now, pure anger. No, I replied calmly. Grandpa did. That property belongs to this family. It does belong to family, just apparently not the family members trying to secretly sell it. I heard him exhale sharply, then lower his voice. Listen to me carefully, Clara. Hawthorne Ridge already transferred preliminary acquisition funds. My pulse slowed again. There it was, the real problem. Money already moved. How much? Silence. How much, Martin? 75,000. I closed my eyes. Advance money. God, he'd gone further than I thought. Was Dad part of that? Another silence. Different silence this time. Guilty silence. Yes. There it was. Confirmation. Not suspicion anymore. Not theories. My father knowingly participated. A sharp ache spread through my chest so suddenly it almost felt physical. Not because of the money, because some tiny pathetic part of me still hoped Dad didn't fully understand what was happening. But he did. He knew. Martin's voice grew harder. If Hawthorne Ridge thinks we intentionally misrepresented ownership, you did. We believed the trust failed. You hoped it failed. That shut him up for a second. Then he changed tactics immediately. Classic Martin. Your father could lose everything. And there it was again. The emotional weapon. Family survival, family pressure, family guilt. Only now it sounded weaker because once manipulation becomes visible, it loses power permanently. I stood and walked toward the lake-facing windows. Rain had finally stopped. Fog drifted low over the water while sunlight slowly broke through the trees. Beautiful morning, ugly family. "I'm not selling Lake Hollow," I said quietly. "You're choosing a house over your father." "No," I replied. "Grandpa already made the choice. I'm just respecting it." Martin's breathing became heavier. Then finally, "You sound just like him." For some reason, that hurt more than insults would have. Because buried underneath the anger was something almost heartbreaking. Resentment. Old resentment. Not toward me, toward Grandpa. Toward never being trusted. Toward being seen as the son who'd always sell the land, eventually. And maybe the worst part? Grandpa had been right. Martin ended the call without another word. I stared at the lake afterward for a very long time. Evelyn eventually closed the folders. "There's something else your grandfather left you." I turned around slowly. She slid a sealed envelope across the table, my name written in Grandpa Walter's handwriting. Clara Elise Whitmore. Seeing it almost broke me instantly, because handwriting survives people in a way voices don't. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page folded twice, blue ink, slightly shaky toward the bottom. I started reading. "Clara, if you're holding this letter, then things unfolded exactly the way I feared they would. First, I need you to understand something clearly. Your father is not a bad man. He is a frightened man. There is a difference, though frightened men often cause damage pretending there isn't. I loved Robert. I loved Martin too. But they spent too many years learning how to measure worth in dollars instead of devotion. You never did. That is why Lake Hollow belongs to you, not because you're smarter, not because you're stronger, because you stayed when nobody was watching. You fixed things before they broke completely. You listened when people spoke. You learned the land instead of calculating it. That matters more than money ever will. Protect this place. But more importantly, protect yourself from becoming the kind of person who only recognizes value after love disappears from it. I love you endlessly. Grandpa. By the time I finished reading, I couldn't see clearly anymore. Not dramatic crying, not collapse, just quiet tears falling onto old paper while sunlight slowly filled the kitchen. Evelyn gave me privacy again. I appreciated that, because grief feels embarrassing once lawyers enter it. Everything exploded publicly 3 days later, not because of me, because Hawthorne Ridge panicked. Once their attorneys discovered the trust had existed for years, they immediately froze acquisition procedures and demanded explanations from Martin in writing. That's when the real unraveling began. Emails surfaced, preliminary transfer agreements, internal messages. One especially catastrophic email from Martin to a Hawthorne executive saying, "The daughter will cooperate after family pressure settles her down." Family pressure. Reading those words made me physically nauseous. Dad came to the cabin alone that Friday night. No Mom, no Martin, just him. For the first time in my life, he looked small, not physically, emotionally. He stood on the porch holding a grocery bag from Miller's Market while sunset turned the lake orange behind him. "I brought food," he said quietly. I almost laughed from the normalness of it, like we weren't standing in the ruins of our family. He looked older than 72 hours earlier. Eyes bloodshot, shoulders lower, tie gone. No performance left. I let him inside. We sat at Grandpa's table eating supermarket rotisserie chicken in silence while evening insects hummed outside near the dock. Finally, Dad spoke. "I should have told you everything months ago." "Yes." Not angry, just true. He stared at his hands. The firm collapsed faster than anyone knew. Clients left, loans stacked up, then the house. He swallowed hard. I panicked. I believed him. That was the complicated part. I actually believed him. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment, then answered honestly, I know. And somehow that made him cry harder than accusations would have, because people can survive being called monsters. What destroys them is being understood anyway. Dad wiped his face roughly. Your grandfather knew I'd fail this test. No, I said softly. I think he hoped you wouldn't. Silence filled the kitchen again. Then Dad looked around Lake Hollow slowly, at the windows, the bookshelves, the old stone fireplace, Grandpa's fishing hat still hanging near the back door. I used to love this place too, he whispered. That one hurt, because I realized he meant it. Somewhere along the way, fear just became louder than love. We talked for almost 3 hours that night, really talked, for the first time in years. No manipulation, no performance, just damage. Raw and exhausted and honest. Dad admitted Martin pushed the sale aggressively after learning about the debts. Admitted they convinced themselves the trust probably failed. Admitted the birthday dinner was designed to pressure me, publicly, before legal paperwork surfaced. That one hurt most because it confirmed everything. You cornered me intentionally. Dad nodded slowly. Yes. No excuses left, just truth. And, weirdly, truth finally made breathing easier again. Martin lost his real estate license 6 weeks later, not permanently, but long enough to destroy his reputation locally. Hawthorne Ridge settled quietly after their attorneys realized pursuing litigation would expose too much internal negligence. Mum eventually came to the cabin too. That conversation was harder. She cried. I cried. Nothing fully repaired. But something became honest finally. And honestly, sometimes honesty is the closest thing broken families ever get to peace. Sophie started visiting every weekend. She claimed it was for the lake air, but really she just hated the silence back home now. One afternoon we rebuilt part of the dock together while music played quietly from Grandpa's old radio. And for the first time since Grandma died, Lake Hollow felt alive again instead of threatened. Late August, 6:41 p.m. I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in Grandma Eleanor's knit blanket, watching sunlight disappear across the water. The air smelled like pine and cold lake wind. Somewhere out near the reeds, a loon called across the darkening water. Same sound, same lake, different person sitting beside it now. People think inheritance stories are about money. They're not really. They're about fear, about who people become once survival starts whispering louder than love. My family almost destroyed itself trying to keep from drowning financially, and maybe Grandpa knew that would happen someday. Maybe that's why he built the trust, not just to protect the land, to protect the last good parts of us from desperation. I still miss who my family used to be, or maybe who I thought they were. But every morning when sunlight hits the lake through Grandma's kitchen windows, I remember something important. Some people leave you money. Some people leave you protection. And the rarest people of all, they leave you proof that they truly saw you long before anyone else did.